Hi, everyone. This is Rich Berliner from TIWA, the In-Building Wireless Association. I'm here with Mario Di Dio today from Helium. Helium is our lead sponsor for the In-Building Wireless event, Fort Lauderdale, on February 10th at the Downtown Event Center. Mario, thank you so much for being with me today. Really appreciate you joining me. Let's talk about helium. Mario, thank you for being with me today. And so we need to explore. There's a lot to know about helium. Frankly, I don't think there are a lot of people from our business that are really knowledgeable about helium and what you're doing. So let's explore that today. First of all, helium is part of a company called Nova Labs. Can you explain that a little bit and tell us
Yeah,
about how that all works?
yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Rich. It's really cool to be here. It's great to be here. The In Wireless Building Association fits right in a lot of things that we're doing at Helium. So it's we've been part of already a couple of events with you guys. We're gonna be again in February, so we'll talk probably about this later. But um, kind of like rewind the tape a second and start from what the Helium is, and so. Nova Labs is actually is just the company, is the company that is behind the Helium network. So when I speak about Helium, I talk about the network in a way. Nova Labs is the entity that created and the founders of the network. But there is a reason why, and we'll get into that in a second. So Helium was started actually a long time ago, about 2013, with this idea of um, how do we create of disruptive on how networks are created. And what I mean with that is that when you think of an operator, of a carrier, of a service provider, you think of someone that is creating a service based on wireless infrastructure. You immediately go and think about, I mean, for the regular people, you always think about those big cell towers or these big antennas that we see on top of hills. So infrastructure, right? You think of this big infrastructure that usually you would probably associate with a very expensive proposition business to get into. And you're not wrong, it is. And so Helium at the start was um, started to challenge their idea of that the a network, a wireless network, could be built in a different way. Which way differently? Well, instead of being the ownership being centralized in this way, is that what if there is a way to build a network or essentially a federation of networks, like a
Hmm.
network of networks, and do it in a way that is it creates value into this world, of course, so it creates value in terms of new coverage, net new coverage that gets created and the ability for that network to be presented as a unified cohort to whoever wants to use it. So when this started, Helium, and it was even prior to me being the company, they focus a lot on IoT. So the Internet of Things, for the ones that are not very familiar with. So the idea of like, dog collars and trackers and all sorts of devices that will, and they are used in everyday's life to track supply chain and all sorts of different use cases. So they started from IoT and they target a specific standard within IoT, which is called LoRa. And uh, and with that, the launch in the market with this small device that was called, we still call in the helium world, hotspot. What a hotspot is essentially a device that generates radio frequencies, generates wireless coverage for a specific standard. As I say, initially it was IoT LoRa, and uh, and essentially, when you install one of these devices, you join a network. You join this network of networks, and you make available your internet connectivity to others via this device. And from there, actually, the company and the network grew exponentially. And why would anybody would that? We'll get into that in a second. But essentially, under that premise that if you can incentivize people to create coverage, will they do it? The answer was an astounding yes. So the network grew, the IoT network grew all the way globally to become more than 1 million hotspots globally. And if you are a little bit more into the space and know that LoRa is actually a pretty narrow band standard that runs at 900 megahertz, so it's pretty wide coverage. Actually, with 1 million hospital, there is a pretty big coverage. So, and the company was able to essentially own blanket in many part of the world, definitely a lot of the US, Latin America, Europe, everywhere. So the experiment worked. And there is not just an experiment, like the actual launch worked. And that network is still active today and is can be accessed by whoever wants to create, let's say, a supply chain tracking business. You can use the Helium network, and there is APIs, there is like interfaces that you can utilize to use that network. Why would anybody do that? The question is how that grow. What was the
The
fuel behind?
impetus. Yeah, what was the impetus for
Why
that to grow?
why would everybody do that? Is because of this incentive mechanism that is leverages a technology which is in many ways sounds like very dark and confusing and very like who knows what, but it's blockchain and essentially utilizes an incentive which is a cryptocurrencies that gets issued by this blockchain, which is called the Helium Network token, to reward people for their work, for that rewards people for their work that of putting these hotspots up and offering connectivity.
Right. So to an extent, this sounds a lot like my cable box, which covers my house, but it's also got a second SSID for someone who might be going by and trying to use that too. Is that analogous to what Helium's doing, or is that a different concept?
No, I think the context there is many similarities to that. Of course, the biggest difference is in the into the ownership part, meaning like you
Yeah.
decided to put up these hotspots and you get rewarded for that behavior.
And I'm not getting
Uh,
anything from the cable company.
Well, I mean, that's one way. I mean, some cable company, they stranded their own access points. They do
Yeah.
this in their own cable plan. They do it sometimes in the residential areas in their own cable boxes. But yes, I mean, there is definitely a difference there into the
Yeah.
approach. But
Right.
the idea is not dissimilar from there. And that's actually, it's a good segue because from the IoT, based on the IoT success, and that's where I kind of came on board because I do come of course, from a telco background more than a crypto incentive or blockchain breakdown. Um, the postulate, the thesis was, can we do the same on the mobile side? Can we actually create a mobile network in the same way? So the company started to go heavily into CBRS first, which were the ones that are not familiar. It is a cellular standards. They use 3.5 gigahertz.
Right.
And then eventually we landed at that point, was part of the team. We landed on Wi-Fi as the technology that right now is being used. What does it mean? It means that now the hotspot doesn't use this new generation of hotspots. They are no lower anymore. That we are CBRS and now they are Wi-Fi. But the basic idea is the same, is to provide coverage
Coverage.
to devices that we carry all around us and create a network of networks of federating and grow in this way.
Right.
And that's today, the network is more than 120,000 hotspots in the US, is active in US and Mexico. We'll talk a little bit about who uses the network, but is a mobile network that utilizes Wi-Fi to carry data from mobile devices
Right.
all, and connecting them to the internet.
Is it fair to consider this sort of Wi-Fi offload,
Yes,
IDaaS, that sort of thing?
I think Wi-Fi, the term Wi-Fi offload is a correct from a point of view from a specific term. But I think what we observe over the years is that I think the reason for Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi to exist is changing it gradually. It's adapting, and the term offload it always has implied historically that you're offloading the macro tower, like you're not putting traffic on the macro cellular
Right.
network. You're offloading into the Wi-Fi, and it's for certain ways is still that's still the case. However, what we see is that the maturity of the Wi-Fi standard and the way the Wi-Fi standard is being employed and the revision of the standard and how the performance and the management and all those things together, they're almost getting to a place where they're already getting to a place when Wi-Fi is many cases actually complementing the network and actually be used not as a substitution in a negative connotation, but as a really as a peer-to-peer to a cellular network. So I heard the term like smart loading these days, which is kind of interesting. I thought it was interesting, or right loading. So this idea of choosing which network serves better the customer at any given time. And look, I mean, this is the future, right? I mean, now we have satellite deals between carriers and satellites company like Starlink or AST Space Mobile, and we live in a world where there's not just going to be one way of serving the customer. There will
Right.
be satellite, there will be macro, there will be Wi-Fi, and so Helium is primed to get into that space in what is technical people call a converged
Right.
unintegrated
So
access network space.
correct me if I'm wrong on this or if this makes sense, but carriers are absolutely unwilling, unhappy, or really resistant to adding more sites necessarily if there are uses for other technologies that can augment what they've already got in terms of coverage. So if they've got to build another cell site, it's going to cost them $1 million, and they can use this Wi-Fi offload, if you will. It
Mhm.
seems to me that they're getting more and more comfortable with that philosophy of, look, let's use this Wi-Fi network and let's not have to put $1 million plus $5,000 a month in rent or something like that in order to get what we want from a traffic standpoint. Is that fair? A fair understanding?
So it is not, in my view, it's a fair understanding. I think it will always work in tiers, and it will always work in a different and much more complex dynamics. But the basic idea is that what I'm trying to say is that um, the carriers they're gonna start they already start looking at Wi-Fi as a way to do as a service delivery platform because of the maturity of the standard, and also because depending on the tier, some of the venues that they want to cover they already have Wi-Fi. And
Yeah.
they are on a renewal cycle of the hardware in which now you have Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 7. They provide such a good coverage or such a good service that try to layer on top, let's say, traditional small cell or DAS system in places where Wi-Fi can actually already do, I would say, all of the job that needs to be done in a
Right.
building. It kind of doesn't make sense, assuming that you have the control of the user experience. That I want to touch on that point later.
Right.
But
But they're comfortable getting communications into their switch from satellite, from land-based cellular, and from Wi-Fi now. So they're warming to that concept that things will come into their switch from multiple situations. Is that
and
fair?
That is fair. And let's also not forget that for this specific time in our lives is that, there is this new technological FWA, fixed wireless access that, is being used by the carriers to, grow their market share. We all see the results in the past quarters of that. Of course, using Wi-Fi in-building allows them also to utilize the spectrum outside to more of the
Yeah,
FWA. So
right.
actually enables them not only a potential cost saving, but also potential revenue opportunities as they shift the load of their towers towards FWA. Now, potentially in some many major airports and major venues and stadiums, things like that, there's still the ability to use small cells and DAS will still be there, and then probably still, I mean, I can't speak on behalf of the carriers, but we heard them in many public settings. They will still do all sorts of investments in those tiers, but for a lot of different other, and specifically for the in-building wireless association crowd, a lot of other tiers instead would probably leverage Wi-Fi more and more. I will see that happening, in my view, more and more in the coming years.
Right. So this hybrid mentality, and you mentioned it too. The fixed wireless thing is sort of the same idea. It's using Wi-Fi in my house and then taking me into the network through my own internet connection. So I'm coming to their switch still, and I'm their customer, but we're using multiple technologies to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, FWA actually, I mean, it uses the cellular link to provide connectivity, let's say, to the house, and then there is Wi-Fi that distributes it. So again, the role of Wi-Fi can be about distributing that capacity inside the building, and it is similar in a way with FWA. My comment was also based on the fact that, like you said, we do see spectrum deals and it's still happening in auctions. Now I think there is going to be an 800 megahertz auction based on my understanding soon. But there is beyond the cost of spectrum, there is the cost to deploy that spectrum.
Right.
And I think I read somewhere, and I don't have the quote right next to him right now, but I think for every dollar spent in spectrum, you need $2 to deploy that spectrum. So even though it's still a very valuable assets for those carriers, the ability to deploy capital when is needed and where and when is needed, it's important because there is a cost associated with this. That is, like, if there is a technology like Wi-Fi that can actually get the job done, they're definitely interested in looking into that, in my view.
Yeah. So there's another hemisphere to your business at Helium too that I only learned about last time we were together in Plano, Texas. Tell us about that piece of it, which surprised the hell out of me, frankly. Tell us about that piece of your business.
Well, I am the general manager of the network side, which means that my day-to-day job is to grow the network, make the network grow as fast as possible, getting carriers to adopt the network. Now, there is another side of the business, which is an MVNO. So we actually have a carrier, which is called Helium Mobile, and that we launched in partnership with T-Mobile in 23. And essentially, the reason why we did that is because we think that creating a network in this way with a unity of economics shifted and is much cheaper the access to connectivity to do it in this way as a federation of networks as opposed to like a centralized ownership structure actually allows the thesis there is that allows for creating MVNOs that they are much more profitable and they have their margin, they're better and the cost to serve is less. And so the reason why we created Helium Mobile is essentially for validating what we were doing and creating and validate this thesis that that is actually possible to do in an economically viable way. And that's what we did. And that's why, for example, we have very affordable unlimited plan for $30 a month, and we even have a free tier plan available for users. But at the basic of all this is this ability to match the network growth with a Helium Mobile subscriber growth, and we see this specifically in some geographies like New York. We have more than 30% of the traffic of our New York base to go over the Helium network.
Interesting. Wow. And that's a thing that most of the audience listening to this podcast doesn't know. So that's why I thought it was important that
Thank you.
we
No,
get
it's
that
good,
out there.
good plug. Thank you for the plug.
So this is an important aspect of this, and I've had some peripheral work with you on the Wi-Fi offload piece, but it's important for people, I think, in this business to understand that this is a great addition to any DAS or in building work that they might be doing, that they can bring a lot of value to customers by contacting you and working with Helium and the folks that you're working with under you, like Resolution Wireless, who is one of our sponsors at the event also, to get basically everything a customer might need from the carrier standpoint and from their standpoint that would help them satisfy their customers. So is that a good sort of way to represent all this, that Wi-Fi offload can be a profitable and important aspect for the in-building wireless folks?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think essentially wherever you have Wi-Fi infrastructure in place, and then of course there is always the if and if and if and then, like in terms of like compatibility, we can get into that if needed. But a modern Wi-Fi infrastructure in place should absolutely be considered an asset for a building venue and I like a venue owner. And working with Helium allows those venues to potentially monetize their access and also to create that coverage in the building, like you say, side by side. For example, with the DAS system, they can extend the life of an existing DAS system. That is, like, again, it's not just a rip or replace. That's not what we're talking about here. It's about complementing the network with something that actually can be very useful for improving the coverage inside the building and for the host to be rewarded for that.
So you mentioned that you've now opened the door by saying monetize it. So there is a benefit to folks who might want to use something like this, they can potentially monetize this. And that's a great way for them to augment what they're already doing potentially. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, look, and again, it is never black and white. As I say, the tiering system and a tier one versus tier two, stadium versus an airport versus a shopping mall versus a residential building, an MDU, they're all different tiers, they're all different needs, and they get valued from carriers differently. In general, there is the potential for Wi-Fi to be monetizable in many of those venues, especially the tier two ones, the tier one and the tier two. So I think that there is this very big debate in the industry right now, and let's not just like tackle it head on about who pays for connectivity and how much the carriers are investing versus how much the venue owner are investing. And I think that just like anything in life, nothing is black and white. It depends in many ways, but I do want to firmly say that um, there is an opportunity. If the venue is a certain type of venue, if the venue is a certain interest in a certain geography for the carriers. And so, today, actually, we should have said it in the introduction, but today, who uses the Helium network? Like, well, we have two of the three MNOs that they are currently active in the network. One is we public announced that with AT&T in April 2025. And then we have several MVNOs, like Google File, like Helium Mobile, like others. They use the network today. So there is definitely an appetite for those carriers to use the network. And also, it's interesting because this is the first time, and I say this it's kind of interesting to watch unfold this. This is the first time that because of this federation kind of uh, approach. This is the first time where any carrier that is part of our carrier roster can look at a geography that, for whatever reason, it might be CapEx, it might be OpEx, it might be marketing. But if there is a specific region where they want to expand, they want to see coverage happening. In the past, they had to, like you said, do BDD
Go
or
to
site planning,
zoning and
site
build a
leasing,
site and
talk to the owner,
right.
get the antennas on the roof, and all that stuff. Now they can literally go through us, and we use what we call a Helium community, which is a community of a little tier three deployers that go to coffee shop or restaurants door by door, as well as like shopping mall in tier one and tier two. They all the way to airports. They are part of the Helium network today, and they can kind of point and shoot mechanism to create coverage and see that and watch the reaction from
Right.
carriers when they tell us, I would love to have coverage there. And in a matter of a couple of weeks, you already have a couple of hotspots in there. It's pretty special. It's pretty different
Right.
compared to
So,
what.
there is a great amount of misconception about Wi-Fi offload and using this technology from people in the industry. And I'm going to cut this up later when we do postings and things. I want to cut this piece of it up. But there is a great misconception and a lot of sort of, I'm not into, I wouldn't touch it. But I think it's a really interesting point that you've made that the MNOs are getting comfortable with satellite now. They're getting comfortable with Wi-Fi offload. They're getting comfortable with fixed wireless. They're getting comfortable with bringing customers into their network in multiple different ways. And I think you've done a fantastic job of getting to where you are by building this diversified network, if you will. And I think Helium should be really applauded for adding an element to whether it's your DAS business or whether you're a real estate person looking for alternatives for your building. There's a lot here. And so, Mario, I want to thank you for being with me today. Unless there's anything else you'd like to cover that we didn't, but I think you really did a good job of telling the Helium story here. Is there anything we've missed that we should cover?
No, thank you, Rich. I mean, I do say it again that I like the in-building wireless association because it provides a very open forum to this type of discussion, and I think that like on one thing I wanted to touch about is the idea of Wi-Fi offload and some of the misconception. I think it's because historically, things comes in waves, and sometimes things that were like there was a big push for Wi-Fi offload in about 2016, 2018, prior to the 5G wave. And back then, Wi-Fi was, there were two things. Wi-Fi standard was a different type of standard that is today.
Right.
Support into the phones was very different. There's one thing I would like to touch on is that if we do an enablement through Helium for Wi-Fi offload, we're not requiring anybody in the building to do anything to connect to the network. So every phone from this major carrier already have this thing that is called a Wi-Fi profile. Its technically name is called passpoint profile. That essentially, once the network is configured correctly, will recognize home as soon as you walk into the building and will connect automatically. So the combination of the standard being much better, the work that Helium is spearheading in the user experience and making the Wi-Fi access better, um, and the support to the device so that this is automatically seamless. All these three things now, all these things are causing the second wave of Wi-Fi flow to be much more, much bigger than what it was
Right.
in the past. And lastly, also I wanted to touch a little bit of some of the work that we're doing into emergency communications.
Ah,
Like there is a lot that and there will probably take another podcast episode, but we believe that Wi-Fi is graduating now to the point that can be used for emergency responder more and more inside building, and it's nothing else. It's a complementation. As I said, this is not a replacement discussion. It's a complementation. There is no reason that if there is a Wi-Fi of let's say a school building or a municipality or a library, there is no reason why theoretically a first responder shouldn't be able to automatically onboard in that network if the network is there.
right.
And so we're doing a lot of work in that area too. A lot of the industry and WBA and other association, they're working towards the same direction. Where we think that um, there is got to be the necessity, and also it would be a missed opportunity for all this coverage to be used for first responders.
Right.
So we are also actively working in that direction.
Right. So good news on that for us is together at the event in Fort Lauderdale, the Winter Sunshine AI Data and Connectivity event that you are the lead sponsor of, by the way. You will meet Jose DeZayas, who is the head of the radio communications group for Broward County in Florida. And this is something that we will discuss with him while we're there. I think that's a very important topic to get to, and I think it'd be an interesting conversation. But Mario, thank you so much. I appreciate you being with me today. We've been talking with Mario Di Dio from Helium, and he's built the network and he's done a great job of it. And Mario, again, thank you. This is Rich Berliner from the In Building Wireless Association saying thank you for watching.